Hi, today's podcast is with Susan Riley. I met Susan Riley, maybe 5 or 8 years ago through a cross-country ski group that was called the SoFit, Skiers Over 50 in Training. Susan is a ball of energy, one of the fittest people of her age group, and has been a journalist forever. Lately, she's been writing columns in the Hill Times, mostly on climate change, but also on federal politics. I really hope you enjoyed this podcast. Susan is wonderful.
All right, so I guess my opening question here would be what initially sparked your interest in journalism?
Wow. I was good at writing. I was in high school. I was a little bit ADHD. This was before they used to diagnose people. I just looked upon it as kind of a wide ranging curiosity. And I had a teacher who suggested that I try journalism. And it coincided, this was way back and before the earth cooled. And it coincided with the opening of the Carleton University Journalism School. I had like a single mom, no money. So I couldn't go away to university. Back in those days, they had quite generous student loans, which I was eligible for and got. So I went to Carleton in one of the first years of the journalism program there. Really, really enjoyed it and stuck with it ever since.
Nice, that's wonderful. And then so I guess my follow-up question would be kind of, I know there's a lot of variation in sort of careers in journalism and stuff like that. What are kind of the main duties and responsibilities, kind of what an average day on the job looked like?
There is no average day on the job, really. Across my career, which was 40 years, I did a lot of different things. Sometimes I covered incredibly tedious city council meetings. Sometimes I had to go out and, cover gruesome things. Sometimes I covered protests, covered a lot of protests in my day. And it really, there was no kind of average day. And then later on, I started to cover federal politics. So I would be on Parliament Hill watching Question Period. This was before it was widely accepted that everybody watched it on television. So we actually went to the House of Commons. That way you could catch politicians coming and going from the chamber and ask them follow-up questions. Back in the days when they were allowed to answer journalist questions, that no longer happens very much. So yeah, so there was no average. I'm going to turn this off.
Yeah.
There was no average day, really.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, that's a great answer, and that was kind of what I was thinking as I was saying that there is kind of what is an average day in a sort of such a dynamic position. I guess my next question would be, how did you land your first job in journalism?
Let me think. Newspapers used to send people around to the universities with journalism faculties. I actually did that at one point too when I was professional. But anyway, they would send editors around and have interviews and whatnot. And all the best, the most coveted jobs were the Globe and Mail and Toronto Star, Ottawa Citizen, and then there were a whole bunch of other little papers. And back in those days, there was quite a lot of local media.
Yeah.
So my marks were not good enough, quite frankly, and I was only 20, 21. I was just too young. Anyway, my first job I got was at the Oakville, I think it was Oakville. Yeah, the Oakville Daily Journal Record. So Oakville, Ontario used to have a little daily paper. And that's where I went for my first job and just covered a whole variety of things. I'd never been in Oakville before. For a while, I lived in Toronto and commuted to Oakville and back and forth. So I only stayed there about 6 months, and then I got a job at the Victoria Times out in BC. Very sleepy, though. Very, very sleepy. The whole place was even way more so than it is now. It was really filled with seniors. And the entire newsroom emptied at 2 o'clock. Everybody would go out to go sailing because they all had sailboats and things. The staff was fairly old as well, with one notable exception. There was a guy, tall, handsome guy, about my age. He always wore a very smart blue suit and a tie. Very good looking guy. And he came from Ontario somewhere. We didn't quite know his background. He used to hint at it, but he had a bullet wound, apparently. He was shot in the back and in the lower back, and he would show us his little bullet scar. He'd done time in jail, we subsequently found out. And he was a very colorful character, very friendly and nice looking, as I said. And I think he was probably a major league con artist. He ended up stealing a fishing boat and disappearing, vanishing. We never saw him again.
That's fascinating.
Well, there were a lot of characters, yeah.
It's always coworkers. It's all these interesting characters you meet on the job.
Absolutely.
I always like that aspect. Yeah. And then I guess my next question too is, I mean, you kind of alluded to it in Victoria there, of it being a much kind of sleepier environment. What do you say are kind of the major differences in work for these kind of smaller newspapers versus these larger newspapers and organizations you ended up?
I think there were more eccentrics eccentric people at the smaller papers. There were more lifers at the smaller papers. When you work at a place like the Ottawa Citizen, which I subsequently worked at, I also worked at Maclean's Magazine for a while. Yeah, you just get more of a cross fertilization of younger people coming in, older people leaving. Yeah, it was a more diverse workforce for sure.
I saw it also said on your CV there about kind of traveling around the world for a year before you moved to Belfast there. What did that look like? What kind of drove you to?
Well, just curiosity, and back in these days, everybody did. It was, I guess, it would be called a break year now. I didn't have any money though as a student or as a teenager, so I had to wait until I'd worked a couple of years and saved some money, and then I went off with a friend of mine. We both quit at the Kingston Whig Standard at the same time, and we joined up with a couple of other girlfriends from Toronto, and we hitchhiked around Europe, which is what you did back then. And yeah, it was fascinating. It was safer back then than it would be now. And so it just, everybody was doing it. We ended all the hippies. I wasn't really a hippie because I had to work. I couldn't afford to be a hippie. But there were a lot of hippies on the road, and we all ended up sort of flocking to these islands in Greece, in a particular island called Ios, and we spent a couple of weeks there, camping on the beach and drinking ouzo and eating tomato salads and, the dream. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, that sounds great.
It was great.
So then, sort of after that, how do you end up in Belfast?
Well, I met a guy in Eos actually on the ferry over to Eos, who was from Northern Ireland, and he was a senior public servant. I mean, although young, and he was on a holiday. So he said, come on back and stay in Belfast," because we hadn't gone to Ireland yet. So I did go back, and we ended up becoming a couple. I ended up marrying him actually eventually. I also landed there right when the so-called Troubles, were at their height. There's Bloody Sunday and a bunch of people killed in Londonderry. And there were explosions quite frequently in downtown Belfast while I was working there. There was a kind of a sinister, well, it's not sinister, a worldwide kind of sexist vibe in newsrooms. So because I was the only woman on staff, they wouldn't send me out to cover the bombings or to cover the aftermath of the bombings. I mean, and they used to make me, like, I had to do endless stories on the impact of the Troubles on children, the kind of softer stories. The Irish Circle of Magicians. I had to go and be cut in half by a magician one. So, in other words, I was off the news. Yeah. Nonetheless, you couldn't help, well, you felt it because it was everywhere. There was a feeling of violence everywhere. We were stopped one night. Robert, the guy I married, we were going across town to visit some friends, and we were stopped by a bunch of young guys in sort of trench coats with sticks, like batons. And they were the UVF, the Ulster Defence League, so they were the Protestant kind of quasi-terrorists. And there's then also the IRA, and you never knew really who you were going to get stopped by. When they heard my accent, they would say, "Yes, but are you a Catholic Canadian or a Protestant Canadian?" And I would just kind of, I'd say, I'm an atheist. My accent, I think, got me out of a lot of trouble because they recognized I wasn't from there.
For sure. Sort of when you're talking about that sexism in newsrooms, has there kind of been, I'm assuming there's been some sort of shift since the 80s in sort of that energy there. Is there kind of a specific period you started to notice was it a gradual change or kind of rapid progress? It's kind of a specific period when things got better?
Yeah, no, I'd say it was incremental. And at one point back, I forget when, I was at the Citizen. The Citizen used to be owned by the Southern family, and it was a progressive force, small L liberal progressive force. Yeah. That kind of journalism almost doesn't exist anymore. I guess the Toronto Star is probably the closest. In any event, they commissioned a study on the presence of women or the absence of women in senior positions in the newsroom. And it was called the President's Commission, rather grandly. And I was a member of that along with a few other editors from different Southern papers. There was a major Southern paper in almost every city in the country. And so we put forward a lot of recommendations, some of which were followed. It wasn't just because of that, but eventually it became almost equally represented, I would say, almost. Not necessarily in the ownership class, obviously, and not necessarily in the editor publishing class, but I wouldn't say... yeah, I don't think that's as urgent. I think the most urgent problem facing newspapers today is survival, really.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, I definitely want to touch on that later in the future of journalism. I guess kind of but we're on that note, what sort of changes have you noticed as kind of an increase in social media and online, the challenges that print journalism is facing?
Well, this was just starting to happen as I retired. So I've been retired for quite a while, although I kept writing a column and I've kept I've kept involved. I've kept doing television and stuff until recently. It's very hard to say. In the olden days, in newsrooms, when I started out working, there used to be a ticker machine that would always be clicking and clacking, and it was like it was like a telegram machine almost, and it said it. So breaking news from around the world would, you just get 2 or 3 sentences about what was happening, and then Twitter for a while started to serve that purpose. It's less so now. It's kind of a bit of a river of vituperation right now. It's not really that useful. Substack now, people are going to Substack instead for the news of the day. But in a funny way, people who want legitimate news, or at least as legitimate as it can be, are circling back to some of the old. So New York Times, for example, has had a massive increase in circulation. Toronto, I think the Globe and Mail is still doing okay. The Toronto Star is doing okay. So, and the CBC has kind of always been there. All of these institutions have their shortcomings for sure, but they're still pretty well funded. They don't do enough, the Canadian papers don't do enough exploratory journalism, but nonetheless, in a strange way, people are circling back to that now.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. I found kind of, well, it started, I know a lot of Canadian news stopped appearing on some social media.
Mm-hmm. They
Bill?
blocked.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And then so I found naturally after that, I mean, part of it was because I could no longer get it from there directly. But I found myself, I was just kind of getting so sick of so much sort of disinformation and just junk that I kind of ended up returning to more of those, traditional, still, although the websites, I don't really have any newspapers or anything like that, but just kind of that checking in news of just, okay.
Do you pay for them?
I just really use CBC myself.
Yeah. Because that's another, paywalls are a problem as well, but they're necessary. I mean, somebody's got to pay the journalists, but yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and I think it makes a difference too when it's sort of funded by the readers versus funded by, large corporate interests.
And can I tell you what I think is the most worthwhile? You may agree with this already, but I think the most worthwhile current news source, especially for people interested in the environment, is the National Observer. Do you know it?
I've definitely heard of it before.
It's called Canada's National Observer. It was started about 7 or 8 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, in Vancouver, with a heavy focus on environmental news. So it's since expanded. It's got quite a large readership. It's got some really excellent writing. It's so useful. It's so useful. I was just reading it today and came across this expression, predatory delay. And this is the new tactic. It's not that new, actually. It's been going on for a long time, but it's a tactic to stop any movement towards containing climate change, right? So you just kick it down the road, you kick it down the road. Everything is going to be a disaster for the industry, this hugely profitable industry. Anyway, it's by a guy called Chris Hatch. I would strongly recommend any student who can afford it to subscribe. It's Canada's National Observer. Highly, highly recommend it.
Yeah,
as a source for environmental news. And really even-handed, too. I should add that it's not pure advocacy. I mean, it's got a point of view, which is that climate change is going to kill us all. So, I mean, that's kind of the bottom line. But it's not advocacy. It's reporting, solid reporting. It's really good.
Sounds great. Yeah. So sort of my next question here, kind of back to just the career history there of how did you find sort of coverage of Parliament Hill different than past positions you had?
Everything's bigger. Everything's more formal. You're a little bit at a remove. Well, you're obviously at a remove from the people making the decisions. I covered City Hall for a number of years before that, and you could just walk up to the mayor or the city councilors. Depends on the size of the city, but it's pretty easy to contact people directly. Not so easy, and the noose kept tightening over the years. During the Chrétien era, it was still Jean Chrétien who was prime minister, I think, until 2003. It was still possible to actually talk to cabinet ministers, to grab them on the way out or to phone their offices and actually talk to them. It started to tighten up during the Mulroney era, and then Stephen Harper just kind of slammed the door, and then Justin Trudeau kept that door pretty slammed, and it looks like Carney is following the same, not quite yet. I mean, there are certain ministers that he's deputized that are allowed to speak on a bit of a tangent, but also an important one. Another thing I've seen over the course of following federal politics up close for about 25 years is the diminishing importance of the environment minister, the diminishing role and profile for an environment minister. I think it reached its high point when we had Catherine McKenna, who was Justin Trudeau's, remember they called her Climate Barbie? Anyway, she was a very articulate, strong, passionate advocate, And they didn't rein her in. They didn't hold her back. They didn't tell her to, chill. Well, they may have, but it didn't really stop her. Now we've got Julie de Bruzen, who's a well-meaning Toronto MP, who's the environment minister, whose main environmental claim is that she worked to extend the urban park network in Toronto, I believe. And she's just been climbing back, and just basically she's an apologist for a policy which is essentially in full retreat. So that's sad to see.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it kind of almost speaks to too of that kind of pushing back environmentalism towards just parks and conservation,
Exactly.
these larger climate,
Yeah.
large scale issues that are difficult to tackle but need to be addressed nonetheless.
Yeah, that are complicated and difficult to
yeah.
to tackle. So now, so everybody gets concerned about, the three toad spotted, Western salamander or something. God love them. Important, but not, or else they'll go after plastic. Let's use less plastic. Also important, but I always see it as a bit of a kind of divergence from the real issue, from the top issues.
Yeah, well, for sure. No, I totally agree. I just question for you here of just, is there a particular piece that you've written or a specific moment in your career that you feel the most sort of personally proud about?
Not really. I think my longevity kind of is. I feel good about my longevity. I feel good about the fact that a lot of the columns I read got a lot of positive feedback. I'm still writing a column once every couple of weeks, and yeah, I still get a lot of positive feedback. That wasn't. I don't think there's any big watershed moment per se, but I did a lot of when I worked for Maclean's. This would be back in the '80s. I was a senior writer for a while, so I did a number of front page stories, heavily researched front page stories. But it was ephemeral. It's the news of the day, sort of, or the news of the week. As a journalist, which is what I was then even as a political reporter, you're still covering things generally. You're writing about foreign interference one week, and the next week you're writing about, armaments, and the next week, you're writing about some politician's latest scandal. So you don't really hone in. And I didn't really start to hone in on environmental issues, I'd say, until fairly late in my career. And actually after I'd retired from full-time work, but was still doing the weekly column, I didn't have to cover the waterfront, so I focused on what interested me.
That's great. And then just kind of back to Maclean's there, of just what kind of differences did you find in the environment of working for a magazine compared to a newspaper? Is it kind of a big shift, or is it kind of similar?
It was a big shift. It's a big shift. It's a completely different set of stresses. You were writing Friday for Monday. Anything could happen, and you were writing the news. Anything could happen on that interviewing weekend, and often did. So you had to write around possibilities, anticipated outcomes, blah, 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 because you couldn't get in and then switch. Such was the technology back in those days. You couldn't, go in, do a quick edit, and then put it back out on the wire. That's not how it worked. It was all in print. It was, I don't know, in Markham somewhere in a printing press getting printed. So it taught you the whole skill about writing around things and also about pulling the lens back. So, for example, one story was at one point the Catholic bishops got involved in an economic issue, I think at a time of, must have been a recession, or I can't remember exactly what the triggering issue was, but a lot of families were suffering, as they always do, poor families. And the Catholic bishops decided to make a comment, and this was a big scandal because, the church and state are supposed to be separated, blah, blah, blah. And a lot of people didn't like this kind of liberal turn on the part of the church. So we had to write about it. But in the meantime, there was a kind of a budget coming down. So there was some news event that was going to happen. So you had to be careful not to write too specifically about that news event because you didn't know how it was going to go. So you sort of drew back and you'd write about the influence of the Catholic Church in Canada and certain prominent bishops, firebrand bishops or priests and nuns. I did a sidebar on radical nuns, So that was different. In a way, you had more time. You only had a week. It seemed like an eternity after daily journalism. But yeah, it was interesting. There were also very many characters when I worked there too. And that was a day of drinking. People drank a lot more. We often, especially Mondays and Tuesdays, because the deadline wasn't until Friday. And things could change, right? So you didn't really start earnestly reporting phoning people and stuff until Wednesday. Anyway, so you go out for lunch at these boozy lunch clubs in downtown Toronto on College Street. And, we'd drink wine at lunch. Like I'd never drink wine at lunch now, but back then we all drank wine. And there was one guy, we call him Lunchtime O Booze, and he used to just belt back the martinis. And it was kind of a whole culture, a very unhealthy one, I might add, but I survived.
Exactly. Yeah, that's great. Um, and then so when you kind of went to back to Ottawa after Toronto there, was there anything that kind of drew you to make that move? Was it more of a career choice? Was it more kind of interested in what was going on there?
No, it was because there was a sharp change of direction at Maclean's. When I joined, a very famous guy called Peter Newman was the editor in chief, and he was known as a writer's editor. So he really liked to encourage writers. He liked to encourage people. But you were able to kind of include some irony and a bit of wit and a bit of flavor into your writing.
Mm-hmm.
It was taken over. He left, and the new editor was from Newsweek and Newsweek in New York, and it was just very kind of formulaic, it was dull. It was really, really dull, just the facts, very dull. And they started editing out all the color and everything interesting, I thought, and I thought, I just don't want to do this anymore. So I went back to Ottawa and I rejoined the Ottawa Citizen, this time in the Parliamentary and Hill Bureau, which was fun.
Yeah, certainly. And then sort of another kind of just sort of differences question here of, I know the CV was talking about being on a segment like the Sunday Scrum. I was just kind of wondering what was that like, and sort of how do you find sort of a video TV segment sort of to differ from your typical print journalism there?
Very, very different, super different. You have to really pare down, get rid of all the peripherals, focus on what you're talking about, keep it simple, try to inject some wit and energy. Actually, I brought that with me. That was part of my personality, so it kind of worked. Yeah, you have to. It's a whole different thing. It's a performance rather than a exegist. It's different. I liked it. I found it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But there are also, it's funny, because on the one hand, you're invited as a journalist to give your considered opinion. You spent the whole week watching whatever's going on. You know the players somewhat. So you're there in that role, but there's an unspoken orthodoxy about appearing on the CBC. No one ever said to me, "Don't be too right wing," or "Don't be too left wing," or "Don't say anything," again, "Don't be anti woke," or "Don't be like." Nobody ever said how you should be or appear or think, but you sort of sensed what the barriers were. It really wasn't a huge problem for me because I think I'm kind of a mainstream. I am, one of the detested mainstream journalists, and I've never been a partisan of any particular party. Probably never will be. One thing that did really bother me though, towards the end of my career, was how the environment, again, to get back to the environment, completely overlooked. It was not an issue. If you tried to bring it in, they just weren't interested, basically. Perfect case in point is there's a little more reporting now, but the ongoing war in Iran. I mean, the environmental damage that it's causing with the bombing of all the oil reserves, and well, everybody saw the black toxic rain falling on Tehran the other day. And the whole uncertainty about oil or the disruption in oil supply, it's always looked upon as a huge calamity for the Western economy, for consumers. And it is, if you're stuck driving a gas-powered car, yeah, your price is going to go up. But it's also an opportunity for the electric car industry as one example. It underscores how important it is to get off oil. Anyway, that kind of approach, or that kind of discussion even, it was not really welcomed. I mean, it wasn't squelched. It's just that there's very little environmental awareness, I would say, in official Ottawa, probably in our national public life at all right now. A long time ago, I remember when Peter Mansbridge, so the kind of Vatican for political reporters back in the day was the National. This was back when you had appointment television and everybody watched the National. Peter Mansbridge was the host. And they had, every second week or so, they'd have a panel on a certain issue. The economy, foreign affairs, cultural affairs. They had, and I remember writing them and saying, do a panel on the environment.
Exactly.
You've got so many qualified people. A lot of them are good talkers. It's just such a broad and fascinating subject, and no response. Like there's just no interest.
Yeah, and I think it's so frustrating too, because they're all just tied to so many larger issues too, of all these things that are getting the views and the hits of just, they're all environmentally caused, of that whole
That's right.
The idea of economically of okay, now the gas prices are all soaring up. Well, it's also the same thing every time trying to phase out oil of oh, we can't shut down these refineries. We need to build these pipelines for all these jobs. And it's like, well, you're constantly going to be on the hook for this dying industry.
Exactly. You're expending billions on this dying industry.
And
Yeah.
it's just trying to prop it up. And it's like, well, at some point, you kind of have to move on and accept
Yeah.
that we can't just keep letting this happen because then larger issues as water supplies continue to
Yeah.
dry up and climate refugees and all these issues of just they're gonna okay, well now you're getting the sort of political big stories you wanted, but they're all environmentally focused and you just brush it off for so long. It's very frustrating.
So this predatory delay is what's you're talking about. And I haven't heard that in the rest of the mainstream media. I haven't heard that expression. I haven't even look, I've always been skeptical of targets ever since, all through the whole COPS process and all these international. I've always been, every government that comes along, the minute they say 2035 to you, or, it used to be 2025, it's not going to happen. You just know it's, and now methane, ever since I started writing about this, it was always said to be it's relatively easy to mitigate. It's not the same as carbon dioxide. It can be mitigated. We have the tools to mitigate it. It costs money, but not crushing amounts of money. And they kept pushing and pushing the deadline farther and farther along. And now I just read again today that the oil and gas industry is claiming they can't afford any mitigation of methane emissions. They're making record profits. They stand to make huge, even more money because of this war. Why don't people wake up and see that?
It's so frustrating, and it's always it's just the industry above everything else, and it's kind of
Exactly.
It's unwilling to adapt and unwilling to change, and it's very frustrating. And always just like predatory being pushed further down. I think it's a lot of industries. Say when we took a field course out to BC a few weeks ago, and we were talking about the aquaculture and the salmon farming and the impacts that's having, and it's kind of thing. Governments come in, they've acknowledged it's so unhealthy. There's all this disease being spread. We're going to finally shut it down. Oh no, but we put you have 5 years to shut everything down, but they're still hatching new fish. And then the new argument becomes, well, we have all these fish here. They're going to live for 5 more years. We can't kill them, and it's just this cycle of just
Get down the road.
Exactly.
And I think I haven't been there. I haven't checked into this lately, but I'll bet you any money there are still huge piles of thermal coal bound for Asia sitting on the dock in North Vancouver. I'll bet you any money that was supposed to end in, I forget, I think it was 2020. That was a Trudeau initiative, and we were supposed to stop. And they always give them a 5-year window. We were supposed to stop the export of thermal coal, and it didn't happen.
Exactly.
I don't think so. Now I'd have to double check that before I wouldn't write that until I double check. But I'm almost positive that it too has been kicked down the road.
Yeah, and that's what's so frustrating with these 5-year windows. And okay, in those 5 years now, there's a bigger issue, and then now it's going to go because of tariffs. We have to go and put all this money back into oil again.
Yeah, there's always
yeah. Or in some cases, just it's a whole new government, and now it's completely just kind of it's someone else's problem every time.
And the the people who work in the oil sands and in that industry, first of all, it's a shrinking workforce, as you probably know, and as they're being replaced by automation, they're almost like held as hostages. They're held up as all these people are going to lose their high-paying jobs. That's not the case, because in one instance, the Trudeau government proposed put actually a lot of money into getting people to close the orphaned and abandoned oil wells, and it was going to use a lot of the same skills and a lot of the same workers as are currently working, extracting oil. It was maybe it would they might not have been as many. It might not, and it never seems to happen. They talked about a just transition that was turned into some kind of a war on the oil sands workers. Anyway, it's very, very frustrating.
For sure. And it's always, we get these sort of two sides, I find, in our classes of, there's the one where it's looking at this very skeptical lens and then of what's realistically been happening with all these targets. And there's the other that's kind of treating it as the SDG, sustainability goals, the CBD, and then just the Paris Climate Accords, all these targets where it's always kind of, this big excitement. Everybody's coming together. It's a landmark decision, and then there's never any accountability. And I think that's what the real issue is. It's kind of who's holding these people to power.
Yeah. And that's, I think all of this is why Mark Carney has been such a crushing disappointment in this regard as Prime Minister. I mean, he does have other strengths, I'd be the first to acknowledge, but crushing disappointment.
Exactly. Yeah, no, and it's very frustrating to see, and then you kind of didn't realize at least some progress. I felt like progress was being made so slowly, and then it'll slow down even more, and then it's.
And Justin Trudeau, for all his weakness, and I think he really exposed himself at that big oil conference in Houston back in, I forget when it was, early in his administration. He said no country in the world would sit on 10 zillion barrels of oil and not exploit it. And I thought, how about exploiting some of our other abundance?
Exactly. Yeah, and it says, well, we have to do it because someone worse is going to do it, and we can do this
Yeah,
sustainably in this carbon friendly oil or whatever the term is they're using now.
which
For
is
the
nonsense. When Carney talked about that, I just thought, what was the phrase? I can't remember now. I know what you're talking about.
yeah, this is just some
Decarbon,
nonsense phrase. Yes,
decarbon
exactly.
oil. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's like desalinated salt. It's an absurdity.
yeah. It
And
makes
this
no sense.
bothers me that this most about the media, since we're talking about the media, that it's not that the reaction isn't more widespread within the small environmental media. Yes, but Toronto Star, Globe and Mail, CBC, even it's just not considered urgent.
Exactly, and I think it's just frustrating too. I think it's that term, the Overton window or something like that, where it's just the what's happening down south is just so insane that now it's, oh, we can't cover this because there's all this nonsense going on elsewhere, and it's, at least we don't have it like that. And there's always this kind of, at least we're not them mindset
Yeah,
instead of a we can be better,
yeah.
which I find particularly frustrating in environmental issues. And yeah, like you said, it's always just kind of kicked down the curb. There's always
Yeah.
something that's kind of more exciting and more getting that focus.
And even the Chinese EVs, that Carney did step back from, the 100% tariff, and was allegedly courting disaster. Trump was preoccupied by something else. He kind of didn't even notice it. Plus, it's only 49,000 vehicles. Plus, most of them are going to be Teslas, and at the beginning, at least, the full start. And anyway, yeah, it's very discouraging.
Yeah. Well, I guess on this topic, my next question would be sort of, I know we've more or less been touching on it indirectly, but kind of what drew you to transition to writing about the environment and climate change with your recent.
Elizabeth May, I would say. I avoided these stories for a long time, being a typical journalist with no background in science, no interest in science, to tell you the truth. It all was so, well, you know what those international deliberations are like, and you know what a lot of, even about methane and extract, I mean, it's all highly technical, and a lot of it is kind of difficult for the average person to
Mhm.
penetrate what the heck's going on. And for that reason, I avoided it for many years. And then I started, but occasionally I'd have to write an environmental story, so I'd phone Elizabeth May. She was in charge of the Sierra, she was spokesperson for the Sierra Club at the time. She was so patient, so non judgmental, and just a patient educator. And she didn't really have an axe to grind. I mean, she was, well, at that point, she wasn't even a politician, but she was just so persuasive, so obviously sincere, so incredibly well informed, and able to break it down so that even a dull witted person such as myself could understand. So I started learning every time I phoned to do a story and got some stuff, information from her. She was elected. I already was predisposed to like and admire her, so I followed her speeches and her policy papers from the Green. Again, they were almost completely ignored on Parliament Hill, but I was interested personally, so I started reading that, following up, and that's kind of what gradually opened my mind and got me into covering more environmental stuff when I could, when the opportunity presented itself. And there were a few other people in the environmental movement as well who were very good at talking to journalists, not being superior, not looking down their
Mhm.
noses, not, but just being patient and explaining the situations. But even while Elizabeth was doing all that and other people were doing all that, I was very skeptical of the whole target thing. Targets, international targets. I thought, well, first of all, they're hard to sell to people. A target doesn't mean anything. What people want is something real, and that's why I'm such a fan of EVs. And I know it's kind of an elite preoccupation. You could look at it that way in a way, but it's not in our country, in our prosperous country. Almost everybody has a car once you reach a certain
Mhm.
age, and they do. I think it's transportation is second after the oil sands as a single source of carbon. Anyway, I'm just saying that we need more programs like that have an impact on the way people live. It doesn't even have to have an environmental sheen. You can just look at it as an economic benefit, which it is. Anyway, I've always thought that that's the way environmental policy should go. Rebates for heat pumps and the various things that governments have done little tiny bits of here and there. That's the way to build support in the public at large, I think,
Yeah.
and to change, make a change that's real.
Yeah, I definitely agree because as much as these are massive scale issues that do require that sort of coordination, you can't really go from 0 to 100. I think it's the local scale initiatives, and then also just practical, tangible. What can we actually do to address these? That kind of makes it so important, and that's kind of my main takeaway from 4 years of studying geography, of just kind of the importance of these sort of community building things that can actually be, because when something's at a local level, everyone's around you, you actually can see it, and then it feels it. So I think the issue, I guess, is just a little tangenty here of just sometimes it just feels so hard to comprehend, and I think that's part of
Yeah.
sort of framing by oil companies and stuff like that of, oh, this is too big of an issue for us to
Yeah.
deal with. And it's kind of when it's framed in a way at that local level or like tangible things, I think that's when real progress and real change happens, incremental.
To me, the most striking example of one project that changed our world practically was when the Dalton McGuinty government back in, well, I don't know when it was, probably the early 2000s, when they shut down that coal-fired electricity plant on Lake Ontario, Nanticoke, almost immediately. And since then, there have been virtually no smog days. That was, I think, 2003, maybe 2003. Anyway, it was a while ago. And and I remember, because I lived through it, I remember the smog days. They were regular. It's like wildfire smoke now. It's like a regular summer phenomenon. And I remember once actually driving from Ottawa to Quebec City and like almost choking because um, there was just so much smog in the air. And if you have any kind of respiratory thing, it's really noticeable. And that single act, which at the time was, hotly opposed, has had a lasting beneficial impact on a big swath of the country. So more stuff like that. And
Yeah,
by the way, the Ontario economy did not tank.
exactly. And I think like what's almost frustrating about that is I've never heard of smog days myself. Is kind of once those issues get solved, it never gets mentioned. So it feels difficult to try and find that sense of progress when it's I guess no one really wants to go and talk about successful stories a lot of the time in terms of news of here 20 years ago, here's something we did really well. It's
Yeah,
I feel like
exactly.
there's not it's tough to be grateful, general broad
Yeah.
thing, but yeah, it's just these moments when environmental policy does succeed. It's kind of
Hmm.
frustrating that we never really get, especially even in our university, of just we don't really ever get positive case studies. I find,
Hmm.
or if so, very rarely. We'll get the occasional kind of conservation. Here's a like the Great Bear Rainforest. Here's a project that worked out well, but for the most time, it's always just teaching us about different environmental disasters, which important to learn from. Nonetheless, it's like a hopeless feeling when you're never hearing these success stories.
The Great Spirit, well, I don't hate to be hopeless again, but the Great Spirit rainforest is under threat too if Carney gets rid of that tanker ban. Because the oil tankers would then start streaming right past that area. Yeah, no, it's. I'm trying to think of other kind of positive stories. There are,
Yeah, well, the big one I know is the CFCs, the
yes,
ozone layer. That's the kind of the main. I would say it's the really only kind of global scale environmental success we ever really
yeah,
talk about,
and
which is
Canada played a key role in that too at Montreal. Yeah.
yeah,
No, that's true. And Stéphane Dion was a very dedicated and serious and intelligent environment minister too.
yeah,
We've had a number who've tried, but it's the prime minister that really that matters.
for sure. Yeah, it is. It's tough as I'm sure by no means an easy role. It's tough when it's kind of the large scale mandate of the government is not really environmentally focused. Of how can you kind of spin that?
And nor should we forget Brian Mulroney either, because he was responsible for the acid rain treaty with. That's another thing with Ronald Reagan. I mean, we're going back even in my past, we're going way back there. But I remember when acidification was quite a creeping problem in the lakes in northern Quebec in particular, and eutrophication it was called. You probably studied this, I'm sure, but yeah, you know how it basically kills everything in the lake.
Mm-hmm.
That process has been, I think, phenomenon has been reversed.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like it reaches a point with these things too where they're kind of so extreme, like the term acid rain, that kind of forces immediate action. Whereas these issues like climate change, when they're so kind of broad and gradual, as much as the impacts are disastrous, there's not really that instant survival instinct that kicks in when you hear that.
Do you ever wonder, though, Freeman, what it's going to take to awaken people? because you can count on, like, the climate disasters and the accelerating climate disasters are touching everyone's lives.
Mhm.
For a long time, the environmental disasters happened in remoter, more remote, less populated areas of the country. They still do, I guess, but a train would go off the tracks
Mhm.
somewhere in northern Alberta, and the fire would, the forest would catch on fire, there'd be a mine disaster. But now it's inescapable. I
Yeah.
mean, all the southern cities are periodically flooding. Wild smoke is choking everybody, south and north. I just wonder, what it's going to take to wake
Yeah,
people.
I think it's starting to happen. I think, as unfortunate as it is, I think it's going to take these sort of powerhouses in the global north. Once we start feeling these direct impacts, like I think the wildfire smoke is a great example of when the air physically in cities like Toronto and Montreal becomes too hard to breathe. And it's kind of, wow, this is actually affecting us. When things are happening overseas, you read about them, you go, that's unfortunate a lot of the time, but it kind of doesn't kick in that same immediate care. And I think sort of issues like this, sort of like climate refugees, water crises, I think these are only going to continue to increase in scale. And it's basically, I think things are going to get really bad before they start to get better.
I hope you're right.
And it's kind of,
I mean, I hope you're
yeah,
right that they get better. Yeah, I'm
yeah,
sure I won't be around. I hope so. But I really do. I just
yeah,
think, when? What is it going to take?
exactly.
When when
There's
Fort
some
McMurray
point.
burnt, when Fort McMurray burnt to the ground, like, was that not a sign from God or something? I mean, wasn't that a sign that was the heart of the oil sands, and the whole
Hmm.
place almost burnt to the ground?
Exactly. Yeah, it's just,
What is it going to take? You know?
and yeah, I was gonna imagine what that's going to be, what the final. Because yeah, there's we can't ignore it forever, and I think there will be a moment of people kind of waking up, but I don't think it's going to be a moment of kind of wide scale class, solidarity. If we all realize what's going on, we all band together. I think, which I do think can happen, but I think it's going to be the environmental
Local.
crises and natural disasters are going to get just so bad that people can't ignore it anymore.
Yeah. You mean politicians can't ignore it anymore?
Exactly, for
Yeah.
sure, and it's to start directly addressing it. And
Yeah.
what they'll kind of blame it on and frame that as is, I don't know. I guess I'll find out. But yeah, I think it's something where it's
And you
just,
watch them turn on a dime too. The
oh, for sure.
politicians who are now kind of essentially acting as touts for the oil and gas industry, they'll
Yeah,
turn on a dime.
yeah.
And
Oh, for sure. Well, I mean, the switch of just the different prime minister in, but a lot of the same MPs who suddenly all no longer climate's no longer the huge priority. It's kind of no longer
yeah.
the trendy thing to talk about, and then it's sort of kind of left behind, which is frustrating to see.
From my perspective too, again, which is very focused on Parliament Hill, Ottawa, federal politics, I would say that, Elizabeth May, thank God, but she's my age. I mean, she's not going to be around forever. Remains an extremely articulate, highly respected member of the House of Commons. Really knows the issue inside out. And apart from her, now there's nobody. And this is why I hope, and the NDP were very weak under Jagmeet Singh, and I think Jagmeet Singh just didn't care about it. It didn't affect him personally. He didn't, he just didn't, it just wasn't an issue that touched his life or his past. He
Mm-hmm.
brought a lot of other qualities to his job. I'm not saying that he didn't, but he didn't care, and he didn't give profile to anybody in his caucus who cared. Megan Leslie used to be a very good advocate. She was an NDP member, but then she left. This is why I'm hoping, even though, as I said, I'm not partisan, that Avi Lewis becomes the leader,
Mm-hmm.
the next leader of the NDP. I've got, issues with him. I don't agree with him on everything, but he is fearless,
Mm-hmm.
and he lives on the West Coast. So there's always already a stronger environmental movement sensibility out in the West
Mm-hmm.
Coast. There always has been. So he might be that voice. But if he becomes leader, and if he gets elected to Parliament, which are two big ifs.
Yeah, exactly. And I think those environmental kind of challenges with the current government is because there's not really any challengers to them. You kind of
No,
make a mega centrist party,
there are no
big
challenges.
tent of just bringing everybody in. Now they've got the majority practically secured after those
Yeah.
by-elections turn out. But it's just there's no one really to kind of sway it either way because the Conservative Party is not advocating for stronger environmental
No,
measures by any means, and so there's no one really to challenge them. It's
there
kind of
is
just
the bloc, but it's limited. I live in Quebec, and
yeah.
Quebec is definitely the greenest province, and
Hmm.
the bloc, they're very good advocates for climate, but again, they speak only to one part of the country.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it's just kind of seeing. I feel hopeful. I can't see
Good.
it being a Carney supermajority for the rest of my life. I think there will be kind of reignition of parties to the left that tend to kind of care about more of these environmental focuses. But for the time being, it's very concerning when there's just kind of no one to challenge it, because it feels like you want things to stay the same or get worse. It's kind of how I feel every election.
Yeah.
And
all these false roadblocks, that's what I don't like. The false, as you said, the kind of peripheral arguments or the always ready excuses to do nothing.
Yeah, this is always kind of just a big...
But I'm glad you're hopeful. I'm hopeful by nature too. It's my nature to be hopeful.
Yeah.
But I don't, right now, I'm not seeing too many.
Well, I think too, and for me, it's like not necessarily a hopeful sentiment at the start, but I do believe that things are going to have to get bad before they get better, and things will reach a point where people can't sort of ignore it anymore. But then I guess sort of my final question here would be just kind of bring you back to journalism. What sort of challenges do you think journalism faces in the future? I know we talked about kind of print journalism and social media trying to just stay alive, but is there kind of anything else you want to touch on?
No, but I will say that, speaking of hope, that the Canadian National Observer is a very hopeful sign. CBC is trying. They have What on Earth. They have a environmental radio program. It's probably got a listenership of about 3 people. I don't see much climate leadership coming from the U.S. either. And that's always influenced us, Maybe Carney's, this is not journalism though, but sorry. This is, okay, let's just do the world first and then journalism. The fact that Carney is kind of drawing closer to Europe, and right now as we speak, drawing closer to the Nordic nations, is a promising sign to me, because they are more progressive on climate. They've all got their skeletons in the closet and whatnot. Nobody's pure on this file, but they're moving in the right direction, and that's good if they drag Canada along with them.
Yeah.
In terms of hopeful signs, to tell you the truth, I don't really see very many right at this moment. But I'm hoping for a new generation of. Although I don't want to be one of the old people who offloads all the problems onto your generation and people a little older than you, because that's totally not fair. I don't think old people get a pass on this. That being said, if you look at protests and things, there are often quite a few old people, like your parents' age and older, there. Your parents' grandparents' age. So we shouldn't generalize according to demographics, but yeah, I'm just hoping that we really need some climate influencers, new ones. I don't know, maybe there are in your cadre, that there are climate influencers.
Yeah, well, I feel like there was, Greta Thunberg is the main one there, and then it kind of, COVID happened, and then ever since COVID, it's kind of, I feel like climate change has just kind of taken the back seat. It was literally a new global crisis. It was very current, and then so it's trying to just get back on the rails there. But I find, it's just kind of, there's the same issue we're having politically here. There's not really, it's sort of a face right now that people are kind of uniting around, and I think that's kind of, so you get a more partisan kind of approach here of a lot of kind of the sort of cult of personality, like you put Trump there, right, of just populism and bringing all these people in who are just kind of enchanted by their personality and nothing else. As much as I think that's dangerous, I think they're also on the other end of the spectrum. To get these things going, there needs to be that sort of,
you're right,
personality and kind of something that appeals to that social and human aspect of.
That's why I like Avi. That's what I like about Avi Lewis, because he's personable, he's smart, and he's not a bully, and he's not he seems to take people as they come. I like also Sephora Berman. I forget which group she's with. She used to be with Friends of Earth. I can't remember who she's with now, but Sephora Berman is a very good person to follow, and Julie Levin as well. They're both, I think, West Coasters, if I'm not mistaken. But again, it's a small audience. You really need somebody glamorous, articulate, a little bit fun, and your demographic, you a little bit older than you, somebody new and fresh, and I think.
Yeah, and I'm hopeful at some point that person's going to come along, and I think it's also too, if can't all sit twiddling our thumbs waiting for someone else to do it. It comes from starting from the ground up. But yeah, I have hope, but I think there needs to be that kind of some sort of that personality and that yesterday aspect to kind of a face to these issues. I think is important, because as important it is to be right and scientifically accurate in politics, I don't think that you need more than that,
You do.
because I'm right on paper. It's like, well,
yeah,
what are you going to do?
And you obviously need more than recurring disasters as well.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think there needs to be that kind of positive spin. But yeah, it's a big issues. But I think, personally, my interests and my focus are all education based, and I think education and journalism kind of, there's a lot they have in common there. Of just, I think the most important thing with these environmental crises is just that raising awareness you know, it has to start somewhere.
What do you hope to do after you finish your academic degree?
I'd like to go to teachers college to start. I really like working with elementary aged kids.
Wow,
It's
cool.
around I think like grade 3, probably my top choice. But when I was about 10 or 11, I had these teachers. They're both very environmental focused, and they'd have us out doing stuff like the composting. We'd remove invasive species on the school grounds. Kind of they organized these protests against Nestle coming in to set up all these wells in the community. Sort of raising
What?
awareness about stuff like the emerald ash borer. So it's kind of I found in terms of that local level, what can I do? It's kind of okay, how can I inspire future generations instead of having like a positive role models? I think something along those lines of as much as I'd like in the future too, something sort of curriculum development-y, to kind of focus more on this environmental stuff.
Mhm.
I think there's also the importance of the local practical, if I can improve just a couple dozen people's lives and make them interested in the environment, that feels like I'm doing my part.
Well, those teachers who taught you have put you on a life course, it seems,
Exactly. Yeah.
and that's great. And
And I think the strongest connections come from just convincing a few people, and it kind of spreads that way instead of trying to appeal at a global scale to millions and millions of people. As important as that is, I
mhm,
think it's just that local and personable impact can't be understated.
yeah, well, I agree with you, and I wish you best of luck too. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Elora. It's a little town, like 30 minutes north of Guelph, an hour or two from the GTA.
Okay, is it like ex-urban or
Yeah, it's a very touristy town. I don't know how many people we have now. It's a couple, it's like 10,000 I think when I was growing up, but now it's becoming a much bigger municipality now. As people are kind of going more and more away from the GTA. But so it's very suburban, but it's like its own little sheltered suburb.
and what is the tourism draw? Is it on Lake Simcoe or something or?
It's just a very pretty small town. It's got all these old kind of limestone mills. It's on the Grand River. It's like a driving distance of like hour and a half, 2 hours from Toronto, which is it's been its own change growing up of watching these sort of corporate tours, going from kind of local, people on the weekend, long weekend, people come down to go for ice cream and walk around to now large scale hotels, 7-story buildings going up.
Whoa.
Of just like there's a weird experience to have growing up, but there definitely was that kind of environmental focus in the town growing up. There's a lot of green space, a lot of beautiful trails. It is a very beautiful place to live, and it's something you don't really realize until you move away. It's wow.
Yeah.
It's a very nice kind of it's picturesque, almost kind of movie looking like small town.
Nice.
It's kind of
Yeah.
the fantasy of a small town, I guess, is what it realistically is. But yeah, so it definitely put me on that environmental focus and these issues of real conservation issues, like I said, of Nestle trying to come in and set up all these welling operations of just kind of immediate. Here's an actual environmental issue. It's threatening us. What can we do?
And did you succeed? Was that a successful campaign?
It was a whole campaign. I keep seeing the signs coming up. It's tough with these things because they're so ongoing. I find it's very rarely a thing of, okay, Nestle's gone for good, and they're never coming back again. Because as much as I know the original well plans didn't pan out, I still see those signs all the time. So I think there's still it was some other, like the well already existed, but it was some company that shut down like 20 years ago and was abandoned for a long time. And Nestle keeps trying to come in and extract all this water from there. So, and I think it's going to be an ongoing issue for a while. But it's definitely kind of all the local outrage and, getting kids involved and stuff like that. It's effective,
Yeah.
coming to a
Because
group
it gets their parents involved in.
exactly. And come to a group of 8 or 9-year-olds protesting you, suddenly, it's
Yeah.
evil. So it's very effective in terms of,
Yeah.
environmental activism there. Yeah, I think that kind of covers most of it there. It's been really wonderful talking to you.
Well,
It was
that's
a
great. I've
fascinating interview.
enjoyed it too, Freeman. I would like to. I hope that we. I hope some of you guys end up, you graduates, developing writing skills and start writing and spreading and wherever. Even if you don't go into journalism per se,
Yeah.
there's Substacks. There's so many avenues. I mean, that's the good news. The good news is there's so many avenues for an articulate voice, and if you're good, you get noticed. You do get noticed, and you get followed. The only problem is you don't get money usually. You have to monetize. Everybody. My brother's always been telling me, "Oh, you got to get a Substack and do this and do that. And get remember blogs, do a blog, monetize it." Maybe I'm just too old to plunge in at that level now, but that would be the only and I also
Yeah.
grew up with the privilege of having not a bad like a middle class income most of my life. So.
Yeah, and I think sort of connecting it back to that sort of hope for the future aspect there, just in terms of the future of journalism, is, as we were talking about earlier, I agree that there's kind of been this push back towards more traditional journalism as kind of the misinformation of social media has come up. And then to this certain degree of, at least if it's someone who, even if it's their own independent writing and independent sort of Substack there, if there's a sort of a sense of credibility and kind of I think there's more of a desire for longer form writing and thoughts on an issue versus just reactionary, short-term videos and comments. I think it's something I've noticed just on the local level between my friends and people my age, and also with the rise of AI, which is a whole other can of worms, but kind of a desire for more of that human influence and kind of local independent people you can trust. What I found. So that's what it gives me hope. I don't think.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to keep my eye peeled for your name.
Okay. Well, like I said, this has been a wonderful conversation.
Nice talking to you.
Yeah, and it's been great. I hope you have a great day.
Thank
you so much for taking the time.
No problem.
I really appreciate it.
It's been fun. Okay. Yeah. Take care. Bye-bye.